Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the latest episode of the New Fashion Conservatives podcast. I'm your host, Justin Phillips, and with me, as always, the Shadow Governor Voss himself.
Robin Voss's strongest soldier.
And we've got a heck of a show for you this week. I think we're going to lead things off with a lot of the immigration protests that have been going on across the country, but focusing on Milwaukee's, as well as a couple of DAs that don't want to cooperate with ICE, and some information on H-1B visas from Wisconsin right now. So I'm going to kick it over to the Shadow Gov to lead things off.
Well, I think it's been a very tumultuous week, and we picked a great time, again, to do a podcast. Mm-hmm. Every week I'm like, oh, what are we going to talk about? And then everything is happening. The entire world seems to be on fire. Mm-hmm. And that's not even talking about the foreign policy things that are going on right now. So there's plenty to talk about. But yeah, obviously we have the protests coming up that are obviously very organic and totally not planned by, billionaires and oligarchs, if you will. Mm-hmm. So that's of course not newsworthy. But the protests are going to happen this weekend. As long as they stay peaceful, I don't really care. It's probably going to just turn into an anti-ICE, anti-Trump, anti-the current thing, pro-Ukraine, pro-Hamas. I mean,
well, that's what we've been talking about.
One cause is all of their causes, and it just turns into this amoeba protest, and it's never ever specific, I should say. Yeah,
that's the one thing we've been talking about is the fact that these protests seem both listless and directionless. Again, we saw the ones in Milwaukee this week on, what was that, Tuesday, when they had an anti-ICE protest, but it turned quickly into, again, whatever the thing was. The protest there had Palestinian pro-Hamas flags, had pro-Ukraine flags.
What does Ukraine have anything to do with immigration?
And I think they even had a slice of pride in there.
I mean, again, it's June after all, which I have to admit, this June has got to be one of the most tame.
Yes.
Just because of everything that's going on, mm-hmm. I forget that it's even Pride Month to begin with.
I thought I saw a tweet, and don't PolitiFact me on this one, that like 40% of companies have scaled back their social media on that. I think 12 NFL teams chose not to make a Pride statement or tweet or
honestly, I think
post.
The NFL is probably one of the organizations that's still embraced it the most. Seems like most of corporate America has kind of let it go. But
yeah.
The GayFL has continued to keep it up. But what about these DAs? What's going on in northern Wisconsin?
Yeah, so let's bring that up quick. So Dan O'Donnell got the exclusive on this one, so shout out to him. There was the Polk County District Attorney Jeffrey Kemp and Rusk County District Attorney Jack Cabrines forgive me for mispronouncing that one, are discussing secretly turning their counties into sanctuary counties, refusing to cooperate with ICE detainer requests. And he posted a couple of emails from both of the DAs in Rusk County and Polk County. And I think one of the big things to talk about with this is these are red counties where we have far left DAs. Both of them went 60+% for Trump. And now you've got these two guys in here. I know one of them was a recent appointee by Governor Evers, and that's, how DAs are vacancies are filled. But the other one ran as a Republican once and then as an independent once and has been reelected.
How else are you going to win up north if you're not a Republican? But it's incredible that, and I believe Wisconsin right now also commented on this and said that this was an email thread that was sent to all the DAs. It wasn't just between them, the two of them.
Oh, that's just ridiculous. That's just silly.
I think all the other DAs were also CC'd in on it as well, which, again, we don't know if there were more conversations out of it, but this John Cabrines, whatever you want to say, he said he was answering another question of someone that was basically kind of acquiescing to it. He says, the original guy said, "I will confess, I am not the smartest person in the room." Well, go figure. But the way ICE is doing this, masked, no hearings, no warrants. I mean,
are we really falling into that trap?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. You're right. ICE agents, because they're wearing face shields, not in the year 2020. Now it's a bad thing.
Mm-hmm.
But, God forbid someone doesn't want to get doxxed for doing their job. So he was kind of giving kind of a wiener response of like, oh, well, I don't like this, but what do we have to do? And then this John Cabrinas, you are not alone. The way this is going down is wrong and will eventually lead to violence.
Yeah, Cabrinas is a far-left former immigration attorney and was appointed by Evers in September.
He's an immigration attorney.
Yes. So,
well, that checks out then.
Yeah.
Well, he said, ICE will get no cooperation from my office so long as they continue these abusive tactics.
And so what's surprising to me, again, is how Kemp in Polk County has won election both in 16 and 20, but switched to an independent in 24.
And still won.
So I hope that this is a wake-up call for those counties, those Republican county parties, and RPW to pay more attention to who Tony Evers is appointing and the type of people that are getting elected in these far, conservative districts.
Mm-hmm. Well, and it goes back to just the 26th governor election is not just determining who's governor. Mm-hmm. All of the circuit court judge appointments, Supreme Court appointments, if there's a vacancy, mm-hmm. the DAs, that stuff makes up, a large portion, over the years that Evers has been in office. So you can't ignore that. And frankly, I would love if RPW spent more time on that, but they don't have the time. They don't have the effort or certainly the money to do it. So I'm not making excuses for them, but if we can't even get the bare minimum done, we should, I think that's more on the county parties to make sure we vet these people, at least find competent people to run against them. But I'm just saying, if RPW has a focus, it's going to be on governor, U.S. Senate, Congress, and stuff like that.
Yeah, no, I hear what you're saying.
But that is very important. It is very important. I would love to get to a point where they are integral in helping that out with that stuff.
But your point about who the governor gets to appoint is far more important. It's very reminiscent of folks that just decided to vote for Trump the first time to appoint judges.
Right.
What did Mitch McConnell
that was 2016.
do is just delivered on judges. And the same is true for the governor. Like I said, he gets to appoint DAs and circuit court judges. And those, are important roles. And you can sneak in these left-wing types in strong conservative counties because they fly under the radar. But, it is an off cycle.
Yeah.
We have, was it 18 months, 20 months until the next election? Mm-hmm. What are RPW staffers in the field doing right now?
I don't think there are staffers in the field right now.
Well, if there aren't, that's another problem. But more importantly, we should have folks that are going through and just doing this opposition research, like county parties and RPW hopefully will step up and start looking at everyone from anyone elected in a county. The parties should know that county party should know their partisan alignment.
Mm-hmm. It was funny. I was just kind of scrolling Instagram and I came across a Wisconsin celebrity, online celebrity that, just pops up. This individual was at the state capitol lobbying against some of the trans bills. Mm-hmm. His name is the Trans Handyman. He's a very interesting character, but he posted on Instagram that someone was at his door talking about Planned Parenthood recently.
That they're out knocking. Planned Parenthood is out knocking doors.
Yeah, and forgive me, maybe if the video was old, but it wasn't. It couldn't have been that old. So they're clearly. They're a 24/7, 365, constantly reminding people. But boy, that's a whole nother issue.
We're lucky. Being in Waukesha County, we have WISRED, which is the county's effort to get conservative-minded folks elected to school boards, village boards, county boards, what have you. And I think they're doing a great job getting those people vetted and getting them through and giving them some resources. Mm-hmm. Getting them on that mailer, getting them
it's better than
check mark.
Nothing.
Exactly,
yes.
Exactly. But right now it's just Waukesha County, and the fact is, it's been going on since 2020, 2021. How have other counties not replicated this immediately? That should be like priority number one.
Yeah.
that our for being a county party chair is getting that, and is getting a WIS-RED style program up and running in your county. And I think this is how we avoid getting a DA who's been elected now 3 times, who is in fact an avowed liberal, pretending to be a Republican and now being anti-ICE.
The only thing I will say about WIS-RED right now is it does bother me when they endorse, like, it'll be a competitive primary and they'll endorse both candidates, and that doesn't that's just saying, okay, whoever wins, we'll support them, and we can notch another win on the percentage. But that's a whole nother thing. But I do appreciate that at the very base level, we're getting some people some basic, like a website, do a mailer, maybe some text messages, just to get something. And I do think it has been a net positive.
Quite frankly, that voter guide with the yellow check mark is invaluable.
Oh yeah,
I think
I've used it.
Yeah, if you're a candidate, if you're a voter that's looking for a candidate and you have that choice to make, you know who the one that's been vetted by the county party, and hopefully other counties see what's going on in Polk and Rusk as a wake up call to get more involved and do some more vetting and maybe get those WIS-RED style programs replicated.
Well, and let's not wait till there's a crisis in Rusk or Polk County where this becomes a problem and you have a DA that's not going to help out. Let's be a little proactive. And I'm hopefully the right people in Rusk and Polk County know about this now and will be able to take some action. But that's not the only immigration issues.
Yes, Wisconsin right now just covered something that's going on at UW, and I bet it's going on across the country at a lot of our nation's higher research institutions, which is so currently University of Wisconsin employs 495 foreign nationals at almost $43 million a year. Now, credit to, I think I said last week, this was Jessica McBride. It may be, but Jim Piowarczak does have the byline for this article. But says that with salaries ranging as high as $320,000 a year, are the foreign nationals getting taxpayer-funded jobs at UW instead of qualified U.S. citizens? The University of Wisconsin has made it impossible for the public to find out. And so we have University of Wisconsin paying 495 H-1B visa holders $43 million. And I think that should be startling for anyone, because I'd be willing to bet that a lot of these folks that are in these positions, and as well as probably too many students for my liking, are Chinese nationals who are, and I've heard this in podcasts that aren't political. I've read this in news articles that aren't political. If you are a Chinese national being educated at a research institution in the United States, you are wittingly or unwittingly a spy for the Chinese Communist Party. Yeah. And what I mean by that is, if they need something from you as an individual in the United States, your family's back in China. And we all know that the Chinese Communist Party will make people disappear.
Nothing is necessarily above them to extract a goal out of them. And so I would not be surprised if they do use plenty of college students, frankly, any Chinese national. And of course, I'm sure people will get upset. Oh, you're just you're profiling or whatever just because they're Chinese. I mean, there's a very real threat, and I don't think it's, we shouldn't just be naive and just assume everyone's, in the United States on proper terms. But of course, you had mentioned earlier, the case in Michigan of these people trying to sneak in this fungus into these research facilities that could devastate crops. And I mean, I think it's not controversial to state that, we got into a trade war back in the late 2000s or late 2010s with Trump and China, and then all of a sudden we got COVID. It originated from a lab in Wuhan. I would not put it past the Chinese to try to disrupt America's global supply chain because they were losing a trade war. And so what's saying that they wouldn't do it again? So I don't think it's unreasonable to be on high alert, which frankly I was a little disappointed when Trump released that plan about the Chinese and saying, oh, we're going to leave them, all the Chinese students come in. It's like, we should be probably a little bit careful.
Yeah, and that is not the only the Michigan story is not the only story that's involved Chinese nationals studying in universities in the United States being convicted of crimes. There's one in one student out of the University of Minnesota was convicted for using a drone to take photos of a Navy bases in Norfolk. There was another one. The Illinois Institute of Technology sentenced to 8 years in prison after he was convicted of attempting to commit espionage and theft of trade secrets. I mean, China is known for stealing.
That's all they do.
Yeah.
They don't build anything. They just steal our defense contractor plans, which probably were disseminated from inside the company to Chinese, intelligence, and then they just reverse engineer it, and before you know it, they have their F-35 jet that just looks a little different.
Yeah, but China is known for having a large swath of control over the average citizen. I traveled there with my wife several years ago, and we had so we went to Beijing, Xi'an, and Shanghai, and we traveled with a guide who was Chinese but could speak English very well. And he let us in on some real interesting takes. One was that he was an unmarried guy, but he had a girlfriend, and they would not allow him to take Chinese tourists to the United States and be the translator for them because they were afraid that he was going to defect. And they would only let him do it if he and his girlfriend were married and probably had a kid, because then they would have something in there. And I teased him a little bit when we were over there, because we did go to Tiananmen Square, and he was very quiet. And he's like, I can't really talk about what happened here. So, of course, I'm like, tell me what happened here. I was like, is this the spot where the tanks were? And he was not super excited to have some of those conversations at that time. But, when we were in the car driving to, the Great Wall or some of the other things, it was great, very educational. But, he admitted that, there's a lot of control that the Chinese government has over its average citizens.
I think it'll be interesting. They have the military parade this weekend, which I think is extremely based, and everyone that thinks otherwise is dumb. I've had already some arguments with some of my friends about this. That being said, I bet you there's going to be some protester that's going to want to run out in front of a tank and recreate the Tiananmen Square situation, even though it's a parade. This isn't like we're not quelling a riot or something back, during the Tiananmen massacre. But that being said, I just think we should be extremely hesitant. And, I don't really know enough on the subject to be able to be super knowledgeable, because, frankly, some of these stories are just coming out because the Biden administration basically vastly increased the number of H-1B visas that we let in and the number of student visas that we let in. And, I just have to, with an increase, you have to imagine there's going to be more abuse of that. But back to, I wanted to discuss real quick, just really quickly, just a little vent session on my part, because the immigration, I know we talk a lot of the national stuff, but this is a story that's in Wisconsin, Milwaukee especially. And they've been following this teacher's aide that teaches at MPS, MPS school, Yesenia Ruano, and she's been kind of used as the poster child for immigration in Milwaukee, and they've been really juicing her story up the last couple of weeks. She's been in the country for 14 years. She went to ICE. She was basically given an order to deport. Then they backed down. Now she's meeting again. She's applying for a T visa, which is only for victims of human trafficking. But I don't want to say it's funny. It might be ironic. She's applying for this T visa for victims of human trafficking, but she wasn't human trafficked in El Salvador. She was human trafficked when she came to the United States. She was sexually abused when she was smuggled in by the coyotes, and after they paid them thousands of dollars. And so she's basically applying for a visa after the actions that she took, or that the coyotes took on her en route to the United States illegally. So why wouldn't that encourage the coyotes to even do it more if people will just get approved to get into the United States, if this is their story?
Yeah, this is I think a clear situation where the left-wing press is trying to lionize one person and cast that as the entire immigration
Correct.
We see this all the time.
They'll manipulate your emotions.
And yeah, they can find the one
She has
person.
2 kids,
Yeah.
so it's a whole thing.
But then there was also the governor had some interesting comments recently on the dairy industry, which is very reminiscent of the argument that Southern plantation owners made in the 1850s and 60s. He says, if suddenly all those people disappear, I don't know who the hell is going to milk our cows. Now, of course, Tony swore, so he's just gosh darn upset about this, and we need to take it seriously. But again, who will milk our cows is the same as the 1860 argument of who will pick our cotton.
It's really annoying. I'm frankly, I'm tired of this playbook, and I don't know why. Well, I guess we'll have to wait for the next election to see if Normie America is fed up with it, that the Democrats only see people that come here illegally, undocumented people, as they like to say, are only good for doing the jobs that they don't want to do or what they consider less than for slave wages, essentially.
Yeah. Well, let me correct you on one thing, though. Tony did come up with a brand new term. Now, the left loves doing this. They love coming up with ways to spin illegality, or so they call homeless people the unhoused. They'll call, now that of course Tony Evers here is calling people who are undocumented or illegal immigrants those who are awaiting to be documented.
Incredible hackery, and I almost didn't believe it at first, but there's a clip from Matt Smith, great reporter who does a lot of good work. I'm going to play that right here just to give everybody some context about just a 2-minute clip, but I think it's well worth the listen just talking about immigration. So here it is.
You watching the situation out in California, any thoughts on those riots? And is the standoff between Gavin Newsom and President Trump similar to what you went through back in 2020 with Kenosha? Is there any comparison to that with you personally?
Some similarity, but during the Kenosha piece, I did bring the National Guard in, and so that's the difference. In California, he decided to do that himself. I'm mainly concerned about the undocumented folks that work in our state of Wisconsin. If indeed, if there is a turning point now, and I'm trying to follow this as much as possible. If there's a turning point now where, instead of finding people that committed crimes and sending them back home, who can be against that? I'm all in favor for that. So if suddenly it's people that aren't appropriately documented or waiting to be documented, and they're picked up because they don't have a document, and that makes them a criminal, that's just bullshit, frankly. We have tens of thousands of people working in the state of Wisconsin, in our farms, milking cows, doing everything possible, in our manufacturing area, in our tourism area. And if suddenly those people disappeared, the 25.8% in transportation that we're seeing, and billions of dollars, all that will disappear. And I don't know who the hell's going to milk the cows. And so I'm fearful. I'm watching that piece, whether it's the National Guard there or the LA police. I'm concerned about that they are looking at things that is going to be hurtful to the state of Wisconsin. That's my bottom line.
Thanks, everyone.
So I just want to start off by saying that is terrible staff work to let him just ramble on incoherently, like Grandpa, listening to MSNBC and going on a rant at the dinner table. But forgive me, he did not only say who the hell's going to milk our cows, but he called it bullshit. And again, gosh darn it.
That makes it more important. And, at the beginning of the clip, first of all, I know 2020 and the Kenosha riots were a long time ago. And even before that, the clip audio is not the great, so I apologize to the listeners. But that is also just Tony being very, very quiet. That's a mic right in front of his face, and he's just being very quiet, and you can hear the background noise over him. So maybe it's time to hang it up, Tony, if you just can't handle interviews. That being said, you might be also a little forgetful, but I believe you did not call in the National Guard, until the situation had escalated to the point where it's like, oh crap, the city's on fire, let's call in the National Guard. Not after you sent off that fiery tweet. Well, staff sent off that fiery tweet.
At 10 p.m., I believe.
Yes,
yeah.
of course. And then later called in the National Guard after everything was already on fire. So you absolute hack who has not paid the price for that. And that's a whole 2022 election thing. But so let's set the record straight on that, first of all. But then, of course, he goes into the immigration thing. You know, I know Tony, it's kind of hard to determine sometimes where his emotions are at, or like if he's like really passionate about something, because everything's just kind of the same emotional level. But I kind of think this was Tony showing a little bit of emotion. Like, what if people just start disappearing? What if, who's going to milk our cows? This is people waiting to be documented. I actually think that I don't want to say he's maybe passionate about it, but it seems like he cares more about this than just some of the other topics that the press stops him about, which is frankly very alarming because people wanted immigration laws enforced, and they wanted it forced in vigorously. The polls show that you are in direct contrast with it. And I also like that he's like, oh, well, if you commit a crime, well, then of course, yeah, I'm all for that, following the law, even though every single illegal person, whether you like it or not, committed a misdemeanor by crossing the border. And if you do it again, it's a felony.
Exactly.
So Tony Evers is an utter hack, and he was rambling on. Oh, immigration just gets me riled up because I just think it's so key to the country. And I know Wisconsin, we have it to a lesser degree, and I know the dairy industry does rely on that, but I don't think people realize that I'm sure there are Wisconsinites that would probably take those jobs, but how much are they paying them? If you're paying, I worked for minimum wage, I worked for 10, 11, 12 bucks an hour doing manual labor back in the day, and it wasn't fun work, but it was honest work, and I didn't mind it at the time. But I wouldn't work for 12 bucks an hour right now. Not a chance. And I bet there's some illegal immigrants that are probably working for 12 bucks, 13 bucks right now. And if an American's not going to do that wage, I mean, well, that's supply and demand of work, and so they're just going to the lowest common denominator, which is the illegal labor, which they can get away with. So,
but let's be clear. Like, I think there's a lot of people that would hold that position, that we're not talking necessarily about the people who are in the construction industry or the dairy industry who are being targeted. I mean, the L.A. ICE bust, I believe they were drug traffickers.
Yeah. The immigration raids or whatever that they were doing wasn't even, it was, I think the DEA was involved too. There was a huge RICO a drug conspiracy that they were breaking up too. It wasn't directly related to, I think immigration was a part of it, but of course then so the riots they were really protecting these drug lords that were probably, fentanyl,
they were cartel
of
members
course.
that were, coming across the border. And I think, the people are willing to establish a bit of a difference in those ones. But speaking of people who are worried that Tony Evers just kind of rambles until some staffer has the wherewithal to finally cut him off, Dan Schaefer. I know your favorite person.
He is my favorite person. And Dan, if you're listening right now, I just want to say thank you for being you. It's funny. I mentioned in our first episode how we kind of got started, and I do remember. I was a Twitter guy way back in like 2009. I remember, and then I just didn't use it for like 8, 9, 10 years. Come back, and I got into the politics on Twitter. I see Dan Schaefer's tweets all the time. I'm like, who is this guy? He tweets all the time, and all of his takes are way up. Of course, liberal. That's okay. And I just started tweeting at him and just using all of his tweets as fodder. And believe it or not, people enjoyed some of the takes. So I have to, without Dan Schaefer, there is no Shadow Governor Voss, So it's like he was there first, and I appreciate his tweets because without his tweets, I probably wouldn't have tweeted. But I would also like to say, Dan, let me follow you on Twitter. Every time I follow him on Twitter, he presses that little button to like secretly unfollow me so I don't get his tweets, but I just see it naturally in the algorithm. So, Dan, just let me follow you, okay? I like to, pick on your tweets, okay?
Well, Dan recently had a long-form piece in his cutesy recombobulation area blog calling for Tony Evers not to run for a third term. And what we find interesting about this, first off, is that things like this don't happen in a vacuum in Democrat politics. Someone allowed him or told him to write this piece. It's the equivalent of George Clooney or Barack Obama via George Clooney writing that op-ed saying that Joe Biden is too old and needs to step aside. Someone is telling Dan, you can finally write the story that Tony Evers is too old and needs to step aside. And so in his most recent blog post, he said that Tony Evers should not seek a third term as governor of the state of Wisconsin. It is time for him to do what so many Democrats have struggled so mightily to do and step aside when the time is right. For the 73-year-old governor approaching a critical moment in his second term with 2026 and the midterms on the horizon, the right time is now. In November 26, when the next gubernatorial election is held, Tony Evers will turn 75 years old. If elected to a third term, he would turn 79 while in office, making him one of the nation's oldest governors. He's already the nation's 7th oldest governor, and 5 of those older than him are term limited from running again. For anyone even in perfect health at that age, there are going to be risks involved. Risks that are perhaps not worthy of taking, given recent history. Which reminds me, first off, of something I vaguely remember Matt Damon going on like Good Morning America, the Today Show in 08, talking about the actuarial tables, saying that John McCain would not survive a term as president and freaking out about it. Mm-hmm. And so again, we see this, with Joe Biden being far too old to carry on. Now we have it here with Dan writing this piece.
Well, I think it's interesting, and it's funny because I believe on Twitter, Dan was like, no one told me to write this. Or this is my own words, and this is my own opinions. And, it's interesting. I meant to share it with you before the show, but I saw, Up North News, you're aware, you've heard of them, correct?
Yep.
Liberal hack organization. They just post liberal spurging out and everything. But they had, one of the hosts had Joe Zepecki on. Joe is running for DPW, and I think there's a third candidate potentially. I haven't been keeping track. But he was basically like, I don't know why Dan wrote this piece. Like, what is he talking about? I don't get why we're doing this now. No one's going to talk about this at convention. It's not a big deal. And I just thought it was interesting. I don't think he was like, it seemed like he was angry, but he wasn't like spiteful or anything. But I just thought it was the tea leaves of, okay, maybe this was unexpected. So, if you're the Dems, you do have to worry about it. Mm-hmm. There is an incumbency baked into being a 2-time governor, and if he runs, potentially a 3-term governor. So there is an incumbency factor baked in, but he is getting older, and the Democrats just, push Biden aside. And obviously Biden is much worse than Evers. Mm-hmm. So do the Dems try to do the same thing? And it seems like this is the first attempt to lightly nudge. Maybe they're going to try to be a little bit nicer than what they did with Biden, because Biden seemed pretty defiant, of course. Mm-hmm. Well, or Jill Biden seemed pretty defiant, of course. But I think it's a similar dynamic here where, okay, I think Tony probably is more reasonable than Joe Biden or Jill Biden here, but how reasonable is Maggie Gao going to be? Does she want to stop the gravy train from rolling? She's got a pretty cushy gig, and if she can continue to basically be, running the show, why wouldn't she have Evers run again when he's just kind of the, boring wins guy?
Yeah, no, boring definitely is tough to beat. I think you brought up something interesting. While Republicans will have their fights in the open about who they like, who they don't like, who should be in charge, who shouldn't, the Democrats might look unified on the surface, but mm-hmm. they all have their own camps.
It's all simmering beneath the surface.
Right.
And then it kind of peeks its head every once in a while. And this just kind of, I think, confirms our suspicions, which
Yep.
everyone kind of knew that this was probably happening behind the scenes, but this is kind of the first shoe to drop as far as,
And-
the race.
Right. And we hinted at it before that, I think Kelda Helen Roys wakes up every morning pissed off that she's not something more than a state senator. And so we do have her latest interview with, I believe it was Matt Smith.
Correct.
Again, basically trying to shove Tony Evers out the door.
You told Wisconsin Eye recently, when asked about whether Governor Evers should seek a third term, you said, quote, traditionally 2 terms have been plenty for a lot of Wisconsin governors, but he's going to decide what he wants to do. Do you want Governor Evers to run for a third term?
Well, he's going to make that decision, but I'm really excited for this weekend. I think the good news is that Democrats around the state are really, really energized. We see what is happening in this country. Republicans are trying to shred the social safety net so that they can give a tax break to the wealthiest. And we're in a great position. We've got a great bunch, and we're going to be in wonderful shape to win majorities in 2026 and have a Democratic trifecta.
So you would like to see Governor Evers do what?
I'd like to see him make a decision, hopefully sooner rather than later, because I do think we've got a lot of elections that we need to be winning and focusing on. And I think as I said, we've got a really strong bench. We've got a lot of great Democratic elected officials and leaders and candidates around the state. I talked to a lot of people who are going to be running for Senate, and I think, we're going to have a great 2026.
Should people be reading the tea leaves into your answer? They will be in terms of not fully saying the governor should seek a third term.
I mean, people should just hear my words. I think the Democratic Party is in great shape. If the governor makes a decision, I hope that's going to be soon. And I'm looking forward to being with my fellow Democrats this weekend.
If he did not run, would you consider a bid for governor?
Well, I'm really focused on building a majority in the state Senate. What I want to do is make sure that our kids get what they need. Our kids deserve better school. Our families need access to childcare. We need to be reinvesting in the universities of Wisconsin. Those are my priorities, and I'm going to make sure that we win the state Senate in 2026 so that we can have a budget that reflects the priorities and needs of our people.
So Kelda Roys planting a very not uncertain flag that she does not want Tony Evers to run for a third term. I was counting, I believe it was 3 times Matt Smith basically pushed her on the same question. So what does that mean? I mean, kudos to Matt Smith. He's always been a pretty solid reporter and pretty fair on both sides, but he's willing to push people, ask a few questions, a few follow-up questions. And credit to Kelda. She's planting a flag. She's sticking with her narrative that Tony shouldn't run. As she said, we have a great bench. That great bench probably with her in the first spot is probably what she's referring to. But I can't imagine this is going to go over well potentially at convention. I think that there may be it'll start with the chairmanship election, and then we'll see how that. I still think Devin Rimker is going to probably take it going away. But immediately after that, it's going to be, what is Tony going to do, especially with the state budget coming up here soon? Tony said, I'll make a decision at the state budget. So we might know, and maybe a month from now, we're going to be talking about Tony Evers potentially not running for a third term.
Yeah, while you mentioned that, I just had to look up quick. I was trying to Google Kelda for governor, see if that website is being squatted on right now.
Any word?
I tried to click on it. It came up with an error. I think she's either... it says the page isn't working, so I'm sure she just needs to flip the switch on it again.
Oh, yeah, of course. I mean, she's definitely sitting on it, but I mean, it's just not an active link. But as long as she, has it. So it is interesting that she's been so vocal, and maybe she's just, I'm not exactly sure the strategy. I mean, I'm sure there are other people, a lot of probably Madison Democrats, that probably don't want Tony to run again because they probably are frustrated that he hasn't done enough, and especially with the state budget coming up. And what does Tony do? Does he sign potentially? I mean, I know the Joint Finance Committee just put out their tax proposal. It was like $1.3 billion. And they put out their education proposals. And I know the Dems are frothing at the mouth because it's not enough money in education as they wanted. So what does Tony do? Does he still sign something? Does he actually stand strong? Because Tony did get a lot of pushback. There was the Ryan Clancy types actually went to his office and were like, if it doesn't have good, solid Democrat policies in it, just veto it wholesale. So there's a lot of factors at play right now.
Yeah, you have to wonder at this point, especially with the direction that the electorate is going for the Democrats, is he going to be looked on as too much of a bipartisan governor
Yeah.
for the base?
Is it going to work against him?
Yeah. Yeah. As it's been that long. I mean, it's been 2 terms. Now, I want to talk about that just briefly for a little history lesson for everyone. So did you know that before 1970, the gubernatorial office in the state of Wisconsin was a 2-year term?
Yeah, I actually did know this, and I looked up the history, and it's very chaotic. I don't know how you can get a functioning government
In 2 years.
in 2 years. How do you even plan? I mean, the senators are long.
Right.
I'm assuming the senators were still 4 years. So the governor was just 2 year. I mean,
But the fact is, only 7 people have been elected governor since 1970. There's 2, Scott McCallum and Martin Schreiber were
Yep.
governor. They succeeded from being the lieutenant governor. But we're not talking about a lot of people, and there's not like a big data. There's not a big basket of data to show that 2 terms is enough for anyone. Because of course you have Walker had 2 terms, Doyle had 2 terms. Now a lot of those, that's about the way the electorate went in those years. Tommy Thompson kind of defied all of that with his 4 terms. But outside of that, you have a 1-term Republican in Lee Dreyfus, a 1-term governor for the Democrats in Tony Earl. So there's not like a big 2 terms is enough thing. So that's just a thing that Kelda is coming up with.
well, I'm glad you brought that up. So she's kind of manufactured her own little narrative that, I mean, yes, recent history. Doyle ran twice, and Scott Walker ran 3 times. Well, besides the recall, of course. So it is interesting.
Yeah, he ran 4 times.
Yeah. So, but it is interesting that Kelda's this is her little scapegoat narrative. Well, only 2 times, yada, yada. No, I think that's all crap. He's not radical enough for her. I mean, she represents, the People's Republic of Manistan. So her constituents are probably frothing for, every left-wing policy you can imagine. And frankly, Tony's not doing enough. And so his bipartisan record might be coming, back on him a little, at least with the base. So
especially if he signs a budget that probably includes a tax cut of some sort and doesn't include anything that the Ryan Clancy types want.
Yeah. Well, let them manage that. Whoever runs for governor will deal with it when it comes. Let them fight it out. Let them stoke this, 100%. It's funny. I tweeted right after the Matt Smith clip went live, and I just said she's running. I mean, I don't think she would be going out on this much of a limb for someone else unless she's planting the seeds that she's going to run. And of course, Matt Smith said, "So are you going to run?" Well, I'm just focused on the Senate right now. Okay.
She's focused on everything but the Senate.
Yes.
If Mark Pocan keeled over right now, she would be first in line for that seat. If Tammy Baldwin
I
decided...
think she would have a fight, potentially, because her state senator colleague, Melissa Agard, just went to the county executive spot, which I'm assuming, if she gets another election under her belt, she would probably be a likely candidate.
Yeah, don't get me... She would use the same talking point on Tammy Baldwin, though. That 2 terms or 3 terms or whatever is enough, because Russ Feingold only stayed on that long, even though Herb Kohl was there for a generation and did virtually nothing except own the Bucks.
True.
So with that, we've already talked about it with Kelda. We already played the game last week with the Republican side. Should we play a little buy or sell?
Yes.
And this buy or sell is, if Tony doesn't run, do you think this person, the people I will name, would come out of the primary or would win the primary?
Okay.
So first off, do you think Tony's going to run for re-election?
Well,
buy or sell?
True. This is really tough because I feel like my answer changes every week with all this new information. I think it is becoming less likely that he runs.
Nope.
I am going to sell that he runs at this point because I'll give Dan credit. putting his age down, saying that he'll turn 75 if elected for a third term, and he'd be 79 by the end. That is pretty old. And I mean, I don't want to be having to do all the rigors of being a governor if I was 78, 79. I just want to be with my grandkids and probably enjoy it. So that being said, and just with some of the tea leaves we're getting, I'm gonna sell on him. I think Tony's gonna hang it up.
So I'll go on the opposite side.
Okay.
Just so we have a little thing to compare in a couple months.
That's fine. That is totally fine.
The thing that I don't know is, so Kathy Evers is not Jill Biden. She's
Correct.
not there, and Tony's kids, to my understanding, are not Hunter Biden, who are in the room.
It's pretty hard to get to that level.
Yeah, but they're not in the room telling Tony what to do that I'm aware of. So with that being said, there are people in the room who are acting like Hunter Biden, who are acting like Jill Biden, and that's Maggie Gao.
Correct.
And I don't think Maggie will be willing to give up her chief of staff position without an incredible fight. And again, we're going to see this, and I think this is the problem that the Dems are going to run into, is they might try and force Tony out. He might not be ready to leave, or Maggie might not be ready to leave, and you're going to see a dirty primary. You're going to see some challenges, and it's the issues that Republicans feel like they faced for a while. Is we beat each other up in a primary to a point where it's easy for the Dem to walk across us and win the race. So I'm going to say he runs again.
Okay.
Because he's also going to look at the list of candidates that are out there, and I think, again, we talked about the camps. I don't think there's certain camps that like each other, and I think that's going to play into it. And I think Tony's not going to look at anyone who could potentially come out of it right now as a successor.
Yeah. Well, I will say that my answer may change. I'm going to just, full disclosure, to just be a hack and completely change my answer, just because we're getting all these new, it's kind of hard to predict, but we're starting to get the tea leaves. The shoes are starting to drop on these different factions saying, oh, well, we want this or we want that. So it'll be very interesting to see how that plays out. But assuming that Evers doesn't run, even Kelda said, Dan said, they have a great bench, using their words, great bench of candidates that could run. And let's talk about them.
Let's talk about some. So I have pulled these up in no specific order.
Okay.
Bit different than the GOP side. So first name on the list, David Crowley.
David Crowley. I think this is actually a pretty hard buy. I think David Crowley, and I think it's only fair to probably talk about David Crowley in conjunction with Cavalier Johnson.
Sure. Yeah.
Just because they're so similar. I'll buy on David Crowley. I think he's got a good enough record. I think he has worked with Republicans enough. I think he's a pretty good retail politician as well. He's got a history in the assembly as well. In running Milwaukee County, Walker did the same thing. So and they both have mentioned Chevy and Crowley have both kind of hinted at higher office. So I think they would, at least from the Milwaukee delegation, obviously Madison wants something, Milwaukee wants something. I have to imagine that Milwaukee, between Chevy and Crowley, one of them will figure out which one wants to run. I do think Chevy will not run. I'll sell on Chevy just because he's only been mayor for a little bit. He's just starting. Well, I don't want to say just starting, but he doesn't want to be the Tom Barrett that ran 3 times.
True.
And, got it as mayor and then ran for governor. I don't think he wants to do that. So, and then my last note is I think Chevy is actually more conservative than David, but he has to act slightly more liberal than he is. Or I think Crowley acts more moderate, but is actually probably more far left
Interesting.
than Chevy. So I think it's a kind of interesting dynamic just because of their constituencies, where Crowley has more of Milwaukee County, which has got some conservative parts. So buy on Crowley, sell on Chevy.
Such interesting. I was thinking recently how, and maybe it's the bias of who I worked for in the legislature and, being a Milwaukee County guy for a while, how little I've heard from David Crowley and Chevy Johnson recently. thinking that maybe their profiles aren't high enough to make that jump right now.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna. You make a good case for Crowley, but I'm gonna sell both of them.
Okay.
I
That's fine.
think they're gonna get squeezed out. And one thing we didn't mention earlier, but Dan Schaefer did field a tweet from someone who said, "Well, Gwen Moore is 73 and ineffective, and has been a career politician. Has been there since the early 2000s."
I don't know, but all she does is use her campaign account or her leadership pack to pay her family money and to like
and to pay for Ubers,
for Ubers, limousines, and like dinner out. That's all she does.
Yeah. So Gwen Moore is not an effective member of Congress. Hasn't been for a while. I know I had actually had this argument with my mother years ago because she worked for a company in the Milwaukee area that was a naval supplier. And my mom would defend Gwen because she would be like, "Oh, she brings us contracts." And I was like, "Does she really do that?" So
Doubtful.
I think both of them I would put much higher on this list if we were talking about who's going to replace Gwen Moore.
Yeah, that will be a very extensive primary whenever that happens.
Yep. Especially because her son,
Oh yeah.
the tire slashing state representative.
Oh boy. Yeah, that is a whole nother thing. But that primary will be an absolute bloodbath. I am all here for it. The Milwaukee Dems are way more willing to be out front and confrontational with each other, so that'll be fun. But let's see.
And you want to talk about politics that I have no idea about, but know that it's divisive and there's a lot of internal struggles, is the sides in Milwaukee Democrats.
Oh yeah.
And the camps that people are in. But anyways, moving on to other candidates, let's talk about the appendix on the Wisconsin body politic. Up and Up brand, Leslie Knope, Sarah Godlewski.
It's a sell, and she is the Democrats' Kevin Nicholson, where Kevin wants to run for Senate. He thinks the governorship is beneath him. Like, when he was running for governor, they're like, "Well, why are you running for governor?" And it's like, "Well, because Ron didn't retire."
That's true. That's true.
You literally killed your campaign that day. And I remember, like, I kind of liked Kevin at one point, and it's not like I hate him or anything, but when as soon as he said that, I was like, "Oh, so you're just an opportunist. You just want something." So that totally killed it. I just see Sarah as someone whose state politics is beneath her. She just wants to be the new Tammy Baldwin, basically.
All right, so I'm going to buy that one because
Okay.
someone's going to get in her ear in the next 6 months
Okay.
and say, "You're exactly like Kelda Roys, but from northern Wisconsin." And if I put that in air quotes,
That's fair.
but she could say she's got northern Wisconsin roots, and if it's someone like Tom Tiffany, they think they could probably go punch for punch with her on northern Wisconsin. I'm going to buy it in that situation, which is a soft buy.
No, I appreciate
But I
the
think
contrast.
Yeah, I think someone is going to tell her she's northern Wisconsin Kelda, and she has some money to her name. I think it's her husband's, or technically,
Correct.
but
She can make things
she's not
happen.
going to have to take out a second mortgage on her house to finance a desperate campaign.
She
Kelda
can make something
Roys.
happen pretty quickly.
Yep. So looking at the next person, an AG stands for almost governor, the same way it stands for attorney general. So Josh Call.
Josh Call, I do think that's a buy. I mean, it seems like there's been a consensus just through conversations that I've had with people that he would be their top candidate. Now, it comes with some caveats. Like, I don't think the Democrat base loves him. I remember when they were talking about the fake electors and they were clamoring for Josh Call to charge them. He didn't. He went after the lawyers as kind of a half measure. But I still remember them complaining about that, saying, "Oh, why did you go after him? They broke the law because the Dem base is insatiable." And then he was at state convention, which they have this weekend. And I still remember the Dan Bice tweet. It's like, "Oh my gosh, Josh Call, what a snoozer of a speech," and just told him he was a terrible public speaker. So maybe he got some speech lessons. Maybe he's worked on it in the last year, but that is not exactly a ringing endorsement. And in fact, do you really think the Democrats are going to want to get behind, especially the Madison Democrats, the state of Wisconsin's top cop.
Yep, that's a good point. That's a good
So-
point. So that's why I'm going to sell it.
Yeah.
I think if this was who's going to run against Ron Johnson, I think there's a better chance that he's in there. But I think, again, I think there's a camp of supporters and consultants and such that I think they'll tell him to.
Yeah, I think that logically, yes, I think he's going to run.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think he is their best candidate, and I don't think the Dems even necessarily want him. But
No, I
it
think
is what it
he
is.
also has to deal with the fact that he's a straight white man. Like,
You can never be too sure these days, but I think it's safe to assume.
so, like, I think they want a diversity candidate. But moving on, state senator, whose constituency is Twitter,
Correct.
Chris Larson.
Sell, just because he's not the right skin color. I mean, the man has run for what? He ran for county exec. Mm-hmm. Didn't he run for governor for a hot second?
I think so.
And then, or he wanted to, I think. And then he also ran. Didn't he try to run for mayor of Milwaukee
Yes.
as well? He's by his own identity politics party. He'll never be able to be more than a state senator. He'll be a state senator forever. I just
And he's going to hate himself for every moment of it.
yeah, but it's his own doing. I mean, his party won't allow it unless he's like bisexual or something. Which I guess if he wants to take that leap, that's on you.
No, I think his best hope out is to somehow become the best friend of whomever runs for
Kelda
president.
Roys.
Well, no, for whoever who runs for president
Oh,
in the next cycle, and can find himself an ambassadorship to a small, Eastern European country that has very little impact.
yeah. I think he's nothing more than just a Twitter troll at this point. So he's irrelevant, and he is good. He's good Twitter fodder to make fun of. But yeah, again, especially for a Milwaukee Dem, he's the wrong skin color.
So the other one, I think, who's in a very similar position as someone who's the wrong skin color, the wrong everything, who's kind of a troll, but not as big of one, is Tom Nelson, the Outagamie County.
I never want to hear the
Executive.
name Tom Nelson ever again. It's so annoying. He kind of pops up every once in a while. He'll be like super quiet, and he'll pop up every once in a while to like show up to work for the one time. He had that whole scandal about how he never actually showed up for work because he was working from home but still, billing it or saying that he was, working. I think he's just kind of the whole Bernie 2020 stuff, the Bernie 2016 stuff is just rubbed off. Like, it's just kind of irrelevant at this point. And that is kind of Tom Nelson's lane, is the Bernie types. So I could see him running for Senate again, but he just gets his like 10%. He gets his 8 to 10%, and that's it.
Yeah, I'm actually.
So I'm going to sell.
So I'm actually surprised that he's hung on to the Outagamie County executive for as long as he's had. He took his lumps in 2016. I had to look this up against Gallagher. I'm sure someone probably could talk him into running for Congress again, but that's about it. What surprised me and why I added him to the list is, in political terms, he's young. He's only 49. So he could be around for a long time, and maybe he sees an opportunity in the future if his congressional district makes a leftward lean. But I think he's going to be stuck where he is.
Probably. So I'm going to do a hard sell on Tom Nelson.
All right. So next up is Sarah Rodriguez, the lieutenant governor.
Well, I was going to say who's
Yeah.
Sarah Rodriguez, and to anyone again not who doesn't know, she's our lieutenant governor, and we discussed this last week, but she's kind of nowhere.
Yeah.
She's kind of a nobody. The only reason she ran for lieutenant governor is because when the maps got redrawn in 2022, that district no longer existed. So she's like, well, YOLO, I'll just run for lieutenant governor, because Mandela was running against Ron.
Yep.
And she won the primary. And by the luck of, hitching her wagon to Tony Evers, she's now lieutenant governor. I'm surprised her name was even mentioned by like Dan Schaefer and those, but I feel like her name has to be mentioned just because she's lieutenant governor.
Yep.
But there is, at least in my opinion, there's absolutely no indication that she has any desire to run for anything. So I'm gonna hard sell on that one as well. But
I'm going to sell on her as well. I think she will want to stay lieutenant governor. I think that's what her hope will probably be. She may end up, if it's a different administration, may end up a cabinet position or something. I think that's where she's at. So speaking of, do you think Mandela Barnes makes another run at statewide office?
I think the time is not now for him. I think he still has to repair his brand a little bit before he does that. Although I thought it was interesting, and I almost included it, and maybe we can include it for another episode. But Mandela was on the CNN panel that, and giving his opinions on it, just got utterly destroyed. And I was like, I just don't think he's ready. And in all honesty, he's probably just waiting for Gwen Moore to step aside, or when she dies in office, whichever happens sooner. And then he would probably be the logical choice, because I'm pretty sure he has a residency in Madison and Milwaukee. And so he could just, I would have to imagine he would probably just wait for that opportunity before him. So I'll sell on the governor as well.
All right. I will sell as well. I think he might pull papers. I think he might form an exploratory committee, or however you do it. I just don't think you're right. His brand is so toxic right now that maybe he's got a better chance if Johnson or Crowley leave for a different office. But
that's true. That'd be interesting.
Again, another guy who he's only 38. So he's
county executive Mandela Barnes.
Yeah. And then finally, so this was the one that was talked up a lot in talk radio. Dan O'Donnell specifically. I'm a bit more skeptical on this one.
Yeah.
But Ben Wickler.
Yeah, former DPW chair, or soon to be, come this weekend. This one is kind of like the Mary Falskowski take, where it's the most intriguing because Ben Wickler has the ability to raise a ton of money, and has raised a ton of money, and he could bring in all the national connections that he has. But is he really that good of a candidate? We don't know, obviously. For example, Tony's got the story, DPI, teacher, all that jazz, folksy. What is Ben Wickler's story? He's been a consultant his entire life, basically, working with Dem groups, essentially, on and off, and now working with the party. Would voters actually glom onto that? I mean, money can change a lot of opinions, of course, and if you can raise a ton, you can make up any story, and I'm sure be okay. But part of me wonders that being a lifelong consultant basically doesn't ring as some kind of nonpartisan, and you could attach everything that DPW has done to him, and I think there would be a lot of opposition research on him as far as things that you could say about him that would be at least loosely true based off all the groups he's advocated for or done work for. So I think it would be interesting, though, because I don't think he's an idiot. He's clearly smart and, is capable, but I don't see it currently. So I'm going to sell on Ben Wickler.
I'm selling as well. I'm with you. I don't think.
Why not just go and be a consultant and make $1 million? I mean, he can make a crap load of money right now.
Yes.
Especially with what's his nuts, the DNC chair right now is like, I don't want to know if I want to do this anymore.
And with David Hogg out.
Yeah, Hogg's out at DNC.
Yeah.
So, I mean, why would he just give all that up?
Another one where
now?
I think he really wants to, and I think he will face enough internal opposition that it will become problematic. You're right. I don't see most legislators go from being a legislator to being a consultant or lobbyist. I can't think of a scenario where being a lobbyist and then being a legislator works out.
Yeah, and I believe in 2022 there were a number of lobbyists that were considering running for governor, selling the outfit, and running for governor. And it's just lobbyist has the bad connotation, even though there are good lobbyists, and people forget Gun Owners of America have lobbyists that advocate for gun rights. Yes, I would hope so, but there are lots of other interests and special interests, and so they just assume all lobbyists are bad. So it is very interesting, but yeah, I'm gonna sell for right now. I think he makes some money, and maybe later.
I think for him, and maybe he just really loves Wisconsin, and I don't know this, but if I'm him, I'm looking at Gavin Newsom or J.B. Pritzker, who he's clearly tight with, being like, I will run your campaign for president so I can be your chief of staff.
Yeah.
Like that seems to me like a better use of his time and more lucrative for him than being governor of Wisconsin.
And especially because probably at the national level, there's probably a culling of the herd of consultants at the Democrat level. Like, for example, I saw Dan Schaefer complain on Twitter about how David Plouffe, who's obviously a very famous Dem activist or Dem consultant, is now working with like Chris LaCivita for like lobbying for Coinbase or something, which I just thought was hilarious. And so obviously he's just making a crap ton of money.
And I think like John Boehner is lobbying for weed outfits right now or something. Like, so it's
a wild.
It is
K
wild.
Street is wild.
We should talk about that later on.
Yeah, sure.
So with that, we have some buy or sell candidates. We'll have to keep a record on these and see how things shake out in the next 6 months or so. But let's get to some candy.
Yes,
And
let's
first
do that.
story, I thought we'd be talking about something different right now. In the city of Oconomowoc, the Rotary Club has apologized and reversed course after their announcement that the 4th of July parade wouldn't include any politicians. And, we went on to find the president of the Rotary Club.
Justin found it.
Yeah.
Full disclosure.
So his name's Mike Menefee. He is an avowed leftist and left a couple of posts up that you could find without being his friend that just trashed Trump, trashed Republicans. And I think this is an organization that you see this all the time, that has been infected with leftist opinions, and they chose to ban Republican legislators from walking in the parade because they're Republicans. And I guarantee you, if there was a Democrat at any level that wanted to walk in that parade, they wouldn't have done this.
Yeah, and of course it's in a community now I don't know like the voting wards or the voting percentages of Oconomowoc, but I do know starting at 124th Street, which is the eastern border of Waukesha and Milwaukee, moving west. The farther you get west, the more conservative it gets. So Oconomowoc is fairly conservative, and there aren't a whole lot of Dem politicians out in Oconomowoc.
No.
So I do find it interesting that, no politicians, just a blanket no politicians, but, by the way, all the politicians are Republicans. Although they did say they were going to allow like the council members and like the mayor. So, but other than that, so I'm glad that they reversed course. The dude was he is an unhinged liberal, the president. But yeah, so feel free to go check out our Twitter. The video is posted of him on there if you want to check that out. But yeah, at least they're glad that they reversed course. And
and I will say, I think that decision was made more unilaterally than the Rotary Club is letting on. I think, I heard that there were a lot of folks that inside that organization or adjacent to that organization that were really upset with it and weren't aware that that decision was made prior to the post. So
well, at least they fixed it and they rectified it.
So Shadow Gov, are you a cigar guy?
I am when it calls for a celebration, which frankly is not all the time, but I am not an avid cigar smoker or anything. But if I'm presented one, I will indeed smoke it.
So I think I smoked a cigar to celebrate President Trump's victory. But like you, I celebrations only. I think this is an effect of being the first of my friend group in high school to turn 18. Is we smoked a lot of cigars then, and we go to Walgreens and buy them that were,
and they weren't necessarily high quality ones at Walgreens.
Those ones were toilet paper tube stuffed with newspaper quality. But we thought we were very cool. And then we got a little older, discovered famous on Brady, as well as Nice Ash, and there's a place up in Germantown, and I forget its name, but there were some cigar bars around Yuli's in downtown Milwaukee. But did you know that there has not been a single new cigar lounge open in Wisconsin in the past 16 years? Yeah,
it's a very niche topic, and frankly, I would have never known unless you told me.
Right, and so I found this out. So Ethan Ray Sanchez at AFP Wisconsin is advocating for AB 211 or SB 211 that allows folks to open new cigar bars. So shout out to him for highlighting this. And so Cigar Aficionado actually wrote about this. It's a bill, I believe it by Nate Gustafson, is going to allow cigar bars to be opened in the state. And again, for me, this is just a surprising one that I didn't know that you couldn't open a new cigar bar ever since our smoking ban.
Yeah, I was
going to
say, I'm assuming that's why it was, because the ban was in place and these establishments were there before the ban. So then they're all allowed to operate, but then you can't really have a new one.
Exactly.
Which, I know this, I believe the bill you're referring to is more of a carve out for them than anything. But thinking about it logically, shouldn't we just? And I don't really have a dog in the fight. I don't really smoke cigarettes. I don't smoke cigarettes, and I don't smoke cigars all that often. But I don't really understand why you couldn't have. If an establishment if a bar wants to be smoking, just post, hey, this is a smoking bar. If you don't like it, you don't have to come in.
You know what's funny is I used to go to Nice Ash,
Yeah.
Which is downtown Waukesha, and again, not a sponsor, nor is AFP. No. We are just talking about this for funsies.
No, just because it's kind of an interesting bill. There's plenty of bills talking about programs and economic development, and this is kind of a little out there. That's different.
But there was one of the bartenders back in the day at Nice Ash used to smoke cigarettes, and it was ridiculous.
Oh, they
so
couldn't smoke.
We'd walk in there. I'd get my CAO American or CAO Sopranos brand because I thought that was cool. The way I smoked cigars, this is the very little knowledge I have, is I have to get the really light colored ones. Because the same with me drinking beer. Like I need the copper ale, the cream ale, the Pilsner. I can't have that fruit forward double IPA aged in bourbon barrels thing. I can't do that.
You're speaking a foreign language now.
So I'd go with these very light colored ones, and CAO had a fun one. Again, I bought based off the wrapper because that's what you do. But I'd smoke it in there, and he'd have to excuse himself and go stand outside a cigar bar to smoke his cigarette while we played Guitar Hero karaoke at that place. So it was, again,
it just seems a bit odd that, at least to me, I am not advocating for necessarily removing the ban, but if an establishment wants to smoke, you should just let them, and they just have to post it. They probably have to follow, health. There's probably some, health, inspections that would have to, happen. But if they want to smoke, I guess I don't have a problem with them. I mean, again, I'm not necessarily encouraging people to go smoke cigarettes. I've had my 2 cigarettes before. It's not a great experience. Would not recommend.
No, and for me, I think it's if you think there's a market where this type of bar would be successful, you should be able to open it. And so, hat tip to Ethan Ray Sanchez and Michelle Ferretta on X for posting about this and me catching it in my algorithm. I thought AFP was having an event with this. I haven't been able to find it. Maybe they'll let us know next time and we can go host a pod and smoke some cigars there. But
it's been a while since I smoked a cigar. I can't remember the last time I did.
I'd look a little embarrassed and need a lot of water. And
yeah, probably. But before we forget, and I know the pod has already gone a little bit over, but we have forgotten it the last 3 times.
Yeah.
Recommendation of the week, which we're going to try to do.
Yes.
I don't know how often we'll do it because...
Well, we'll call it of the week, but we'll just see how often it happens. So recommendation of the week is just something we want to talk about that just doesn't have a real slot to fit in. It's a book we're reading. Maybe it's a Netflix show or something. And in my case, I wanted to recommend a Netflix show, and that's The American Manhunt for Osama bin Laden. It's a 3-part miniseries on Netflix that walks through everything that happened between September 11th, 2001, and the day they caught and assassinated Osama bin Laden.
Forgotten Country, Geronimo. Yeah, it's funny. There's a million 9/11 documentaries out there. A lot of conspiracy theories about the whole situation. They're all interesting, even if I don't believe all of them. But that being said, every time I see a 9/11 documentary and I see the towers go down, it awakens a primal urge to just bomb somewhere in the Middle East, just indiscriminately. And I'm not necessarily like a neocon. I'm not necessarily advocating for that, but it's just, of course I was a young person when 9/11 happened. So like it was still, raw, and I didn't really necessarily know what was even happening. But looking back in hindsight, it's like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that actually happened. And so it's a very good series though.
Yeah, no, I was a freshman in high school when it happened, and I have that same thought. Let's just play some Toby Keith in the background while we do it.
Yeah.
The couple of comments I want to make on it. So the first episode is very interesting in that it talks about the CIA folks and kind of what they went through following 9/11. And the second episode, I almost turned it off because it has Leon Panetta and the CIA,
Brennan.
John Brennan, who is
obviously huge hacks.
Yeah, a traitor in my eyes. But I got through that because of Robert O'Neill is in the second and third episode. He's the Navy SEAL.
He's a lot of fun.
He is cool. I actually heard him speak at a Wisconsin Manufacturing Commerce event several years ago.
Oh, really?
And his thing and his 9/11 story is just deeply impactful. And I, was ready to jump out of my seat and go back in time and join the United States military.
Yeah, I know. He gets you really fired up, and he invokes the patriotic urge within me. But it's a good series. Yes, the middle part when they obviously transferred from the Bush administration to the Obama administration, despite John Brennan being a horrible individual and all that jazz, I did think it was interesting to see kind of the transition because I wasn't really paying attention to the Bush administration. And I remember the elections, but I wasn't keeping up with it. And of course, when OBL got killed, it was a great time. And I remember that unifying moment where that seems kind of like the last time America was somewhat unified on something. Was
I even remember where I was when that happened because I think I was watching Inception with my folks.
Really?
And my phone just lit up with USA and America, fuck yeah, and all those great things. And the interesting, I do want to point out one last thing in the documentary is, so Ben Rhodes is in there, Hamas Ben.
The speechwriter.
Yeah, who refers to President Obama just as Obama the entire time. And for me, it seemed just supremely disrespectful to not call your boss, who's the president of the United States, President Obama, at least once.
I mean, at least call him by his first name.
Yeah.
Hussein.
But yeah, he just calls him Obama the whole time. And again, you worked with that guy, and maybe you're close, and maybe you're cool. Maybe he's cool with it, but put some respect on his name. He was the president of the United States when this happened. So that's my take on that one. Recommendation of the week. Check it out. We're going to try to do that every week, but that's a wrap on this one. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe to our podcast on Apple, Spotify, Amazon, wherever you get your podcasts. Show notes will be found at our Substack, newfashionedconservatives.substack.com. Follow us on X at New Fashion Pod, Facebook, Rumble, Truth Social at New Fashion Conservatives. Send us memes, feedback, hate mail to newfashionpod@gmail.com. That's a wrap. Thank you. I'm Justin Phillips.
I'm Shadow Governor Voss, Robin Voss's strongest soldier.
We'll see you next time.